Chapter 1. Sailing Between Ice Walls. In 1918, a vessel set sail from Norway towards the Antarctic coasts to continue the great expedition that had begun a few years earlier, 1901. Its sister vessel also sent from the same country. For many years, the Antarctic region had attracted too much attention, and it was common for expeditions to those southern latitudes, the most remote regions wrapped in unfathomable mysteries, to be financed. Nos Confunden. There were 7 crew members. Their captain was Dromson Tyler, a young man with little experience, but who had captivated the Royal Navy of Norway in those last years due to his great performance and bravery in patrol missions during the war and his previous expedition to the Arctic. This had bought him the ticket to lead an investigation of such magnitude despite his young age. Others commented that the offer was scarce, since experienced leaders did not choose this type of expeditions. Traveling to the south was complex due to the harsh climate and the mysterious stories surrounding the area, told by sailors of the time. Nos Confunden. The vessel encountered several problems they tried to resolve along the way, having to make several stops due to various inconveniences. In fact, the expedition was almost cancelled because of this, but after almost 20 days, the vessel was finally ready to set sail towards the Antarctic Circle. Once they overcame the large waves, they began to see enormous icebergs, and the navigation became even more complex. The waters turned a very dark blue, and they sailed parallel to the great ice walls that began to emerge on the horizon with a strong headwind. The sun reflected off these great walls, blinding the eyes of the crew. There was almost no swell at that time, but suddenly a great storm broke out, and a loud cracking sound came from the direction of the walls. It was as if a great mirror was shattering from one end to the other. The captain ordered them to continue, and so they did for several hours. The storm gradually made navigation more and more difficult. It got to the point where the captain ordered a change of course to move the vessel away from the ice walls. But on the other side, strong winds and a strange swell pushed the vessel back to the same position. They were caught in a back and forth from which they could not escape in any direction except forward. Again, a strange sound could be heard, like a kind of echo, but together with the same sound from before. It resembled a mirror breaking into pieces, but each time it grew more intense. The crew was overwhelmed with tension, not really knowing what maneuver to perform. The storm began to ease, but the swell kept pushing them back towards the walls, and they had less and less room for navigation. They felt cornered. Suddenly, another sound was heard in the distance, seeming to come from the other side of the walls. It was an unbearable shriek, brief at first, but intense. Then it continued for several seconds, and later, these sounds lasted almost 4 minutes with brief intervals. Nos Confunden. This went on for several hours. The crew could not bear it. Some collapsed onto the cold, wet wooden deck, others rolled around, and the captain, on his knees, looked up at the sky wondering what they should do. The situation was extreme, and they began trying to send distress signals. When the storm passed and the shrieks subsided, the captain looked around and was completely alone. He started calling for the others, but he found no trace of any crew member. With tears in his eyes, he began to think they had fallen overboard, perhaps due to the sound itself, or perhaps some had jumped, unable to endure that harrowing sound that seemed to pierce the mind itself. He was left alone on his vessel. and in desperation, he began calling each one by name, but it was in vain. The others had vanished. As the captain tried to turn the vessel around to continue searching for his companions, a kind of passage seemed to open to his left between the great walls, again accompanied by that strange cracking sound. Considering the swell and the fact that the storm seemed to have moved northward, Dromson thought the best option would be to enter this passage to see if there was any coast beyond and some way to turn back, though he had no other choice. The ship followed the course almost without any effort, as a current seemed to guide it directly into this strange and narrow passage, swaying dangerously from side to side, as in some sections the curves were very sharp. The current simply kept carrying the vessel along a frenetic adventure, scraping against the edges, and scraping along with it the very luck of surviving. Nos Confunden. Chapter 2. Through the Eyes of the Navigator. I was on deck, kneeling, asking myself deep inside what Providence itself would choose for my destiny, when I finally opened my eyes and saw an immense open sea on the other side. Now the ice walls had been left behind, and the vessel had crossed them through a very dangerous passage, and I had no idea how it had even managed to do so. I then chose to explore this unknown sea, although returning was also impossible due to the strength of the current itself and the sheer impossibility of maneuvering through the sharp curves of the passage. Nos Confunden. I then began to sail through a calm sea, moving away from the walls, but without truly knowing where I was, nor knowing the fate that awaited me. And so, almost 3 days passed, drifting completely without direction. I began to understand then that only a miracle would save my life, and the signals from the vessel had not worked before, much less now. The radios were dead. Besides, what kind of rescue could even be attempted? Not only was I far away from the world, within the Antarctic Circle, but I was also in a completely unknown zone, and from what I could tell, a place extremely difficult to access. Nos Confunden. Suddenly, one morning, when I was already certain I would die in the middle of this unknown sea, a shiny white vessel began approaching from the distance. I couldn't distinguish whether the brightness came from the reflection of the sea or if it had lights that dazzled. I began desperately sending signals to be seen. I could observe that this strange vessel had taken a direct course towards my position, so I simply waited. Although I must admit it was the longest wait of my life, and during that time I even began to wonder if I was imagining the whole thing. This vessel was entirely white and had a red insignia on its right side, but I had absolutely no idea what country or force it belonged to. The vessel made a short sound from afar, which I interpreted as a command to stop, so I began to significantly reduce my speed. From this peculiar vessel, 2 men descended in some kind of small boat with a red light illuminating the area around it. It was like a small, fully enclosed box. The speed with which they approached and the shape of the boat they descended in left me completely stunned. I couldn't understand where such advanced technology came from, as I was familiar with the vessels of the British Royal Navy and even the German submarine power. But I had never seen anything like this before. Nothing was familiar to me. In just a few seconds they were alongside my vessel, and both men climbed aboard the Norwegian ship. With what little strength I had left, I proceeded to welcome them. Or at least I tried to. My appearance was death itself. I had endured the worst hardships, and I believe I had already surrendered to dying in this strange drifting sea. That was what I tried to explain to them, but the words wouldn't come out of my mouth because of the desperation consuming me. These men had human features, but their eyes were much larger and more prominent.
Confunden.
They wore dark clothing, and although they tried to greet me in some way the moment they stepped onto the vessel, they did so in a language I did not recognize. And all of this filled my body with a strange chill. Fear of the unknown overtook me, but at the same time, they had become my only hope of survival.
Nos confunden.
Chapter 3. The Encounter with the Strange Beings from Laurentia. They looked at each other and then began to ask me questions in English, although with a strange accent. I tried to follow them with my basic English and explained that I came from Norway and needed help, as my crewmates had disappeared and most likely drowned. Then, one of them put his hand into something inside his dark overcoat and pulled out an object with a powerful blue light. He then began to speak Norwegian, in a strange but fairly fluent way, a formal bokmål, fluid but mechanical, with a few small errors and a peculiar accent, although understandable. Even though I was very confused, the whole experience had been so traumatic that I hadn't even had time to deeply reflect on everything happening around me. This was how the strangest conversation of my entire life began. The man who spoke Norwegian began by saying that I could call him Hatton, and that he understood my confusion about these waters and about them, since their appearance was somewhat different from the humans I was surely used to seeing. But he assured me they were just as human as I was, with small genetic differences because they were descendants of the great JB and the Venusians, but they would provide me with more information about that later. I simply tried to follow what they were saying, but my gaze was completely lost. I felt dizzy, and I could feel my body about to collapse at any moment. Then these men began to ask me some questions, and once again I tried to explain that I assumed my crew had simply jumped overboard, unable to withstand the shrieks coming from those ice walls. The men looked at each other again and began to speak in another language, and then Hatton told me that they had not heard those sounds, but it was very likely they were caused by the opening of the passage.
Nos confunden.
What passage? I asked. Although I imagined it was that narrow channel with strong currents, I wanted to know more. The passage you crossed, Hatton replied, and then added, You crossed a portal passage. It opened at the exact moment your vessel was sailing on the other side. Time was aligning precisely with your fate. I truly don't understand, I replied then. The Norwegian they spoke was sometimes complex to understand, and the whole situation was so strange that their words didn't make much sense to me at that moment. I told them that I was very weak, almost at the point of collapsing, as if all the strength my body had been using to survive had completely given out. These people then seemed to realize the seriousness of my condition and took me to my cabin, handing me some packages, saying, "This is for you, eat and drink. It will make you feel better." I really had no idea what these people were giving me. I even distrusted it. But what else could I do? I was truly weakened, and I couldn't last much longer in that state. So I began eating what was inside that grey package. Visually, it was very strange. A firm but flexible mass to the touch, odorless, with a cream color and pinkish parts.
Nos confunden.
When I tasted it, I found it exquisite and smiled at them as a way of showing gratitude. They were saving my life. The men then looked at each other and gestured for me to keep eating. Once I finished that strange mass and drank what seemed to be normal water, although with a more bluish color, I recovered almost instantly. I then felt an energy I had no sense of where it came from. I proceeded to tell them that unfortunately I had nothing to offer them as thanks. "Where are you from?" I dared to ask. "From another time," Hatton's companion commented, and he added, You wouldn't understand, but we could say we are from lands you do not know, as well as from another timeline than the one you come from." "How could it be another timeline?" I asked, absolutely confused inside. "It's another time. We could say we come from another time because you have crossed a barrier into another reality." "Another time? From the future?" "No, not necessarily. Look, you crossed that barrier, and inside here things flow differently. Maybe you can understand it this way. We are from a country you do not know, simply because it was never created in your timeline."
Nos confunden.
By that point I was submerged in absolute confusion, and so I tried to ask, "But where are your lands? Are they nearby?" "No, not nearby either. We come from far away. We haven't crossed any barriers at the moment. We are in what we consider our timeline." "So you're saying this is your timeline, but we are far from your lands? And how can I return to my lands and my time?" I asked, distressed. "Look, we can help you return to your lands, but the passage won't be open much longer, and we are already quite far away. So you can take me there?"
Nos confunden.
"Yes, we can reach it quickly with our vessel, but we cannot cross into your lands. Therefore, we regret to inform you that we cannot fully assist you in this matter." "And when will this passage open again? I don't understand. Who opens and closes the passage?" "It doesn't work that way. It's something complex to explain for you to understand. But I'll tell you what's important. The portal will not open again on this side for approximately 6 months of your time, which would be..." The man then looked at his companion, waiting for the answer. The companion touched something on the blue screen of his handheld object and said, "That would be 15 suns of this time. Do you understand?" 15 suns? How long is that? But will I be able to return to my lands? The red sun you see there will need to rise to that position 15 times. It's complex to explain the passage of time compared to what you know from the other side. Of course, you will be able to return, but it is dangerous for you to go back now. If you send signals, they will surely send ships to rescue you. Your vessel could even be found there, empty, without any crew, and that would make things even more complicated. "But why would they find the vessel if we are right now aboard it?" I asked, now with disbelief. "Look, after crossing the ice barriers from your time with the vessel, there is a possibility, although rare, that it will duplicate. Your other vessel would then be left adrift without any survivors, while you are here on the same vessel. This can happen due to the portal and the abrupt change in timelines. It has happened in a few cases. Later they find vessels empty of crew, even with hot food served on the tables, just before crossing a portal."
Nos confunden.
I was truly left trying to process all of this. I couldn't understand any of what was happening. It all felt like a dream that had turned into a nightmare. "And how do you know all this? Have many people crossed this portal?" "From your lands and time, only a few, sir. But there are records from long ago where your kind crossed easily." "What do you mean by my kind? Where exactly are you from? What lands do you belong to?" "Laurentia, sir. That is the name that applies in your language to our lands. Although we doubt you have ever heard it mentioned there inside, since everything is forbidden." "May I see a map? Do you have one with you now?" I requested firmly. Hatton's companion approached me and pointed to the object in his right hand, from which a transparent blue screen opened, displaying a map. Then Hatton tried to explain. "Here we are, and here are our lands, Laurentia. Can you see them?" I could see the lands he mentioned, but I still understood absolutely nothing. The technology these beings had was incredible. A map unfolded right before my eyes, with an advancement I had never seen before. It was impossible to touch it without my hand passing right through the blue screen. I then asked, "Is this the passage then?" while I tried to point to a spot on the map over some walls surrounding the known continents. "Exactly, sir, that very one." "Do all these lands exist?" I asked, amazed, and then exclaimed, "You are not from this world, you can't be."
YouTube channel Nos Confunden.